Few people realize that the kindest person in the room is often carrying the heaviest emotional weight. An empath is not simply someone who cares deeply. An empath is someone who feels deeply. They absorb emotions, notice unspoken pain, and often spend their lives trying to bring comfort to people who may never fully understand what they give in return. Because of their patience, their compassion, and their willingness to forgive, many people make a dangerous mistake. They assume an empath will always be there. They assume that no matter how many times trust is broken, promises are ignored, or feelings are dismissed, the empath will continue to stay, continue to understand, and continue to give. That belief has destroyed more relationships than most people realize. The truth is that empathy is often mistaken for weakness, when in reality it requires tremendous emotional strength. It takes strength to remain kind when disappointed. It takes strength to remain patient when hurt, and it takes even greater strength to keep seeing the good in people after being let down again and again. What makes this so important is that empaths rarely react the way people expect. They do not always argue. They do not always seek revenge. They do not always announce that they have reached their limit. Instead, they absorb pain quietly for months or even years. They carry emotional burdens that nobody sees. They make excuses for the people they care about. They convince themselves that things will improve. But beneath that calm surface, pressure continues to build. And when that pressure finally reaches its limit, the outcome can be shocking. Not only for the empath, but for everyone around them. Many people never notice the warning signs until it is already too late. They only recognize the value of the empath after the connection has changed forever. In this video, you will learn what an empath really is, why their kindness is so often misunderstood, what slowly pushes them toward their breaking point, and why the consequences of breaking an empath can be far more severe than most people expect. You will also discover lesser-known truths about emotional exhaustion, silent detachment, and the powerful psychological shift that happens when someone who has given everything finally decides they can give no more. Most importantly, you will understand why the moment an empath stops fighting for a relationship is often the moment the other person begins to realize what they have lost. The final part of this video reveals the consequence that catches most people completely off guard. So make sure you stay with us until the end. If you're interested in human behavior, psychology, relationships, and the hidden patterns that shape people's actions, you're in the right place. Welcome to the channel, and if you're new here, subscribe now and join us for more insights into the human mind and the behaviors that most people never notice until it's too late. Most people look at an empath and see kindness. They see patience. They see someone who listens, someone who forgives, and someone who seems willing to understand almost anything. What they usually do not see is the amount of emotional pressure hidden beneath that calm surface. One of the biggest reasons empaths endure behavior that others would leave behind is because they naturally try to understand before they judge. While most people see actions, an empath often sees the pain behind those actions. When someone becomes distant, an empath wonders what they might be struggling with. When someone becomes rude, an empath looks for the hurt that may be causing it. When someone disappoints them, they search for explanations before reaching conclusions. This ability to understand people is one of their greatest strengths, but it can also become one of their greatest vulnerabilities. Because while other people may recognize a red flag and immediately walk away, an empath often stays longer than they should. They convince themselves that the person deserves another chance. They believe that everyone makes mistakes. They remind themselves that nobody is perfect, and little by little, they continue investing emotional energy into situations that may no longer deserve it. The difficult part is that most empaths do not realize how much they are carrying. They become so focused on helping others that they stop paying attention to their own emotional needs. They listen to problems, they offer support, they absorb stress. They become the safe place people run to when life becomes difficult. Friends call them during emotional crises. Family members depend on them during hard times. Partners lean on them whenever problems appear. Over time, this can create a dangerous imbalance. The empath becomes everyone else's source of comfort while having very few places where they can unload their own emotional weight. Many people assume that because an empath appears strong, they do not need support themselves. But strength does not eliminate emotional exhaustion. In many cases, it hides it. What makes this even more complicated is that empaths constantly give people the benefit of the doubt. A promise gets broken, they forgive it. A boundary gets crossed, they overlook it. Their feelings get hurt, they tell themselves it was not intentional. Again and again, they choose understanding over self-protection. This pattern often comes from a sincere belief that people deserve compassion. The problem is that some individuals learn to depend on that compassion without respecting it. They begin expecting endless patience. They start assuming that no matter what happens, the empath will remain available. As a result, unhealthy behaviors slowly become normal. What would have been unacceptable in another relationship becomes tolerated simply because the empath continues giving chances. At first, this does not seem dangerous. In fact, it may even look admirable. The empath appears loyal, supportive, understanding. But beneath the surface, emotional exhaustion is quietly growing. It rarely arrives all at once. It builds slowly. One disappointment adds a little weight. One broken promise adds a little more. One moment of feeling unappreciated creates another layer. Individually, these experiences may not seem significant. Together, they create a burden that becomes heavier over time. The empath keeps carrying it because they care. They keep carrying it because they hope things will improve. They keep carrying it because walking away feels harder than staying. Yet every emotional wound leaves a mark, even when it is hidden. Many people believe emotional burnout happens suddenly. In reality, it often develops so gradually that the person experiencing it barely notices. An empath may wake up one day feeling tired without understanding why. They may feel less enthusiastic about conversations they once enjoyed. They may begin needing more time alone. They may feel emotionally drained after interactions that previously felt natural. These are not random changes. They are signs that emotional resources are being depleted faster than they are being restored. The empath continues giving while receiving less and less in return. This is where the first major misunderstanding begins. People expect breaking points to look dramatic. They expect arguments. They expect emotional explosions. They expect visible conflict. But empaths rarely reach their limit that way. Their breaking point is often silent. Instead of raising their voice, they become quieter. Instead of demanding attention, they pull back. Instead of creating confrontation, they begin creating distance because their emotional journey toward detachment starts long before anyone notices it. One of the earliest warning signs is reduced emotional investment. The empath who once checked in every day begins checking in less often. The person who used to remember every detail becomes less engaged. The individual who once put enormous effort into maintaining the connection slowly starts conserving energy. This change is easy to overlook because it happens gradually. There is no dramatic announcement, no major event, just small shifts that become larger over time. Another warning sign is decreased effort. Empaths are often the people who keep relationships alive. They send the message first. They initiate conversations. They try to solve misunderstandings. They make sacrifices. They create opportunities for connection. When emotional exhaustion begins taking hold, these efforts start disappearing. Not because they suddenly stop caring, but because they are becoming tired of carrying responsibilities that should never have belonged to one person alone. Relationships require mutual effort. When only one person continues investing, fatigue becomes unavoidable. People frequently misinterpret this stage. They assume the empath is simply busy. They think it is a temporary mood. They expect things to return to normal. What they fail to understand is that emotional withdrawal rarely happens without a reason. The empath is not becoming distant by accident. They are responding to accumulated experiences that have slowly changed how they feel. The problem is that many individuals pay attention only when they start losing access to the empath's energy. They notice the silence. They notice the reduced attention. They notice the absence of effort. But by that point, the process has often been developing for a very long time. As emotional withdrawal continues, another shift begins to appear. The empath stops explaining. Earlier in the relationship, they may have expressed their concerns repeatedly. They may have communicated their feelings. They may have tried to solve problems through conversation. But after enough disappointment, many empaths begin believing that their words are no longer making a difference. Repeating the same concerns becomes exhausting. Explaining the same pain becomes exhausting. Eventually, silence starts feeling easier than continuing a conversation that never creates change. This silence is often misunderstood. People assume the problem has disappeared because the empath has stopped talking about it. In reality, the opposite may be true. The empath has stopped talking because they have started emotionally disconnecting from the outcome. The energy that once fueled endless discussions is fading. The desire to fight for understanding is fading. The hope that things will improve is fading. What remains is emotional distance. At this stage, many relationships reach a dangerous point because the warning signs remain invisible to those who are not paying attention. They continue assuming the empath will always be there. They continue relying on old patterns. They continue taking emotional support for granted. Meanwhile, the empath is quietly approaching a limit that few people recognize until it has already been crossed. The final breaking point rarely comes from one dramatic event. This is one of the biggest misconceptions about empaths. People often search for the single moment that ended everything. They look for one argument, one betrayal, one mistake, one decision. But most of the time, the truth is far more complicated. The breaking point is usually the result of accumulation. It is the combined weight of countless experiences stacked on top of each other over months or years. Repeated betrayal plays a major role in this process. Trust is one of the most valuable things an empath offers. They want to believe in people. They want to see the best in them. Every betrayal damages that trust. The first betrayal may be forgiven. The second may be understood. The third may be excused. But eventually patterns become impossible to ignore. Trust begins eroding. Confidence begins fading. The empath starts realizing that understanding someone's behavior does not make that behavior acceptable. Lack of appreciation creates another powerful source of emotional damage. Many empaths spend years giving support without expecting much in return. They help because they care. They listen because they care. They sacrifice because they care. Yet every person needs to feel valued. Every person needs to feel seen. When appreciation disappears, the empath begins feeling less like a person and more like a resource. Their kindness becomes expected rather than respected. Their efforts become invisible. Their presence becomes taken for granted. Emotional manipulation creates even deeper wounds. Because empaths naturally care about other people's feelings, they are often vulnerable to guilt-based pressure. They may be made to feel responsible for problems they did not create. They may be convinced to ignore their own needs. They may be pushed into carrying burdens that belong to someone else. Over time, this creates a toxic cycle where the empath continues giving while receiving increasing emotional strain in return. One-sided relationships are another major factor. Healthy relationships involve balance. Both people contribute. Both people support each other. Both people make efforts to maintain the connection. In one-sided relationships, this balance disappears. The empath becomes the giver. The other person becomes the receiver. Day after day, month after month, the imbalance grows larger. The empath keeps investing because they care, but eventually they begin recognizing a painful reality. They are building a relationship alone. Perhaps the deepest wound of all comes from being valued only for what they provide. Some people appreciate the empath's support, but never truly appreciate the empath as a person. They value the advice. They value the comfort. They value the patience. They value the emotional labor, but they fail to value the human being behind it. This realization can be devastating because it forces the empath to confront an uncomfortable truth. The connection they believed was mutual may have been dependent on what they were willing to give. And as these experiences continue accumulating, a quiet transformation begins. The empath who once overlooked every flaw starts seeing patterns. The empath who once carried every burden starts feeling the weight. The empath who once fought endlessly for the relationship begins questioning whether the relationship is fighting for them. Little by little, the emotional foundation that held everything together starts cracking beneath the surface, even while everything on the outside appears unchanged. There comes a point in the life of many empaths when the struggle inside them becomes heavier than the connection they have been trying to save. It is not a dramatic moment. It is not always marked by an argument, a confrontation, or a final goodbye. In fact, the moment everything changes is often so quiet that the people around them do not notice it at first. For a long time, the empath has been carrying the relationship. They have been explaining their feelings, expressing their concerns, offering solutions, and hoping that things will improve. They have repeated themselves more times than anyone realizes. They have tried different approaches. They have given countless chances. They have remained patient through disappointments that would have pushed many other people away. Yet eventually a realization begins to settle in. The empath starts seeing that understanding someone does not automatically create change. Caring about someone does not guarantee they will care back in the same way. Loving someone does not mean they will value that love. This realization does not arrive with anger. It arrives with clarity. One of the biggest signs that everything is changing is that the empath stops explaining. Earlier, they may have spent hours trying to communicate what they were feeling. They may have carefully chosen their words. They may have tried to avoid conflict while still expressing their pain. They may have hoped that if they explained themselves clearly enough, the other person would finally understand. But after enough disappointment, they begin to recognize a difficult truth. People who genuinely want to understand usually do not need endless explanations. They listen, they pay attention, they care enough to notice. When the empath realizes that their words continue falling on deaf ears, they slowly stop using them. This silence often confuses people. The person who once communicated openly becomes quiet. The person who once tried to solve every problem becomes distant. The person who once fought for the relationship appears strangely calm. Many people mistake this calmness for acceptance. They assume the problem has been resolved. They believe things are finally improving because the empath has stopped complaining. But what they fail to recognize is that the silence does not mean the pain disappeared. It means the empath has stopped believing that explaining the pain will make a difference.